We are wrapping up our series on the Sermon on the Mount. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and I think it's just a beautiful passage of Scripture, but even more importantly, it's really at the heart of Jesus' teaching. So we are in Matthew chapter 7, verses 12 through 29, and we're thinking about the road less traveled. And Jesus said this, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow, and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from the thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name?' But I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, evildoers.' Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise person who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like the foolish person who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall." Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. May the Lord bless his word to our hearts and minds this morning. Well, as I said, we're looking at the road less traveled. I know a lot of people are traveling this weekend on Memorial Day weekend. Of course, the race is later today. And I don't know, race fans out there? Indy race? Don't worry, you'll be out in plenty of time for 12:45 to see the start of the race. Heard this story about the Indy 500 that I love. And this guy was a huge fan of the Indy 500, but he'd never been in his entire life. And so his business had this contest, a sales contest, that if you won it, you won a free ticket to the Indy 500. And so he did everything he could to win that ticket. He won the sales competition, won the ticket to the Indy 500. He gets to the day of the race, and he finds his way to his seat, and lo and behold, it is clear up in the top of the stands. He feels like he's closer to the Goodyear blimp than to the race, and so he's kind of discouraged about there, but he's got a pair of binoculars, and he's watching the race in these binoculars, and as he's watching the race, he kind of looks down in front of the stands there, and he sees there's an empty seat. And he thinks to himself, well, they must be getting a hot dog or Coke or something. But halfway through the race, he notices that seat is still empty up front. And so he decides what he's going to do is he's going to try to take that seat. And so he makes his way through the security guards and what have you, finds his way down to that empty seat. And he asks the guy next to the seat, he says, "Is this seat empty?" And the man says, "Yes." The guy said, "Can I sit here?" He said, "Sure." And he sits down and he's just enjoying this race. And he says, "Man," he said, "I just can't believe it that anyone would have a seat like this, wouldn't show up for this race. It's an incredible race." The man said, "Well, actually, it's my seat. It's actually my wife's seat. And we've been coming every year to the race since 1967, but she passed away and couldn't be here today." And the person turns to this man and says, "Well," he said, "couldn't you find a friend or a relative who could come?" He said, "No, they're all at the funeral." I know, it's bad, but it's funny. What can I say? So, hopefully you're not that big of a race fan, right? So, anyway, I don't know how I'm going to get back onto the road less traveled. Oh yeah, the road less traveled. So, it's Memorial Day weekend, and you may be taking trips, and you may like the big highway or the narrower sort of country road like my daughter and I. But it's interesting, Jesus in this final sort of section of the Sermon on the Mount, it's Matthew 5 and Matthew 7, I recommend reading. I try to read it every week or so just to inspire and instruct myself on how to live and never attain to. But Jesus starts it out with the golden rule. And you probably know what the golden rule is, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Treat other people like you want to be treated. And it's said in a very positive way. And Jesus says all the law and prophets are in this command, in this challenge, really. And you think for a moment, I just challenge you to pick up the newspaper, turn on the news, and think, what would the world be like if we actually followed the golden rule, right? So there's the great command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That's the great command. And then there's the golden rule, and of course there's a great commission. But if you do those three things, you're in really good shape. And so is the church, by the way. But the golden rule this morning, treat others as you would have them treat yourself. Man, if we would just do that. So you don't need to get caught up on all the rules and all the fine print. Just go with that one. But Jesus knows this is not the way of our culture. You don't really have to read the newspaper. It's not the way of most of our lives. Sometimes we come the closest to my friends and family, treat them like I'd want to be treated. But really, Jesus isn't putting any sort of fences around that. Jesus is saying, treat everyone the way you would like to be treated, and you will find that you've fulfilled everything, that your heart is in the right place, and your life is in the right place. And then Jesus gives three images that are very interesting that relate both to this golden rule and also, I think, to all of the Sermon on the Mount. And the first one is this image of the narrow gate, right? And I like to think of that narrow gate as kind of like the road less traveled. Jesus says there's this big gate, this wide gate, this easy gate that anybody can get through, right? It's all the traffic and all the attention is this way. But Jesus says that doesn't lead to the way of life. The narrow gate, the less traveled gate, the harder gate actually leads to life. And as I thought about that, I thought about Robert Frost's great poem. I want to share it with you. Probably know it, but I want to read it again and maybe think of that in your mind, as Robert Frost was a person of faith, and it's the road not taken. It says this: 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. It means lots of things, but for sure one thing is really a spiritual metaphor for life. And I think it fits with this narrow gate. That Jesus is saying there's an easy way, there's an open way, there's a highway of life. Well, then there's a narrow way, a harder way, less trafficked way, and that is the one that leads to life. Now, my daughter and I, we take lots of trips and love it, but, I got to tell you, we love the country roads the best, far and away. Thank God for the GPS that always, kind of recalibrates, how to get to wherever you're going. But we do find sort of a sustaining strength in driving out of the way places. But this is bigger than that. Jesus is saying not everyone lives by the golden rule, nor by any of the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus has pointed to in this great, beautiful sermon that's both poetic and practical and powerful. And Jesus is challenging each of us to go the way less traveled, the road less traveled. And then Jesus gives this imagery, too, of the fruit tree, right? And Jesus says, the tree by its fruit. Now, I know I have some farmers and lots of gardeners here as well. And this time of year, if you are, from the city or just to know, you can tell a fruit tree because it's got blossoms on it, right? For the most part. And you might not know, if you're not really knowledgeable, whether it's a apple or pear, peach, or what have you, but a true person does, a true farmer or gardener does. But later on, when it bears fruit, later in the summer, anybody can tell. It's an apple, peach, pear, what have you. And so Jesus is saying, our lives are like this tree, and sometimes you can't tell at first what the person is really like deep down in their character. But if you wait and watch, you will see the fruit that grows. Now, Jesus is saying that helps with judgment in life. But what I would tell you is this. Remember last week when part of Jesus says was don't be judgmental? As my daughter would say, don't be judgy. That's her thing. So, and I think a lot of the teenagers say, don't be judgy, because they probably see us acting judgy, frankly. Don't be judgmental. So take a moment and think about that tree as your own life rather than, someone else's. How are you doing with your fruit today? Are you bearing the fruit that God would have you? And it takes time. It takes maturity to bear fruit. My Bible study, Wednesday evening, which has been by Zoom for quite a while, we looked at a couple weeks ago Galatians chapter 5, which is the fruit of the Spirit. Now, do you recall from Vacation Bible School, VBS, or Sunday school or Bible studies, what the fruit of the Spirit is? Remember the 9 fruit of the Spirit? Remember what they are? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I can never remember except for that song. I have to sit there and go like that for. But you can look it up in Galatians chapter 5, the latter part of that chapter, and just think about how am I doing. You can rate yourself 1 to 5 and that stuff, but we all fall short, but it's fruit to aspire to. Would that we had a little more fruity Christians. I'll say it again. Would that we had a little more fruity Christians, all right? Amen? Because if we were fruity Christians like that, we would be a light in the world. People would look at us and say, I want to be part of that family of faith because I love the way they treat each other and even treat people who aren't their friends. They don't even know. They're just great people. They're light in the world. And so Jesus is saying, if you're the tree like that, then you'll bear fruit. Now, you may recall that in the Gospels, Jesus also tells this parable about this landowner who goes by this tree that hasn't bore fruit for some years then, and the master gardener is with him. And the owner says, cut it down. I'm tired of it not bearing fruit. And the master gardener, being a real gardener, said, wait a second. Just give me another year to give a little extra attention to it. I'm going to prune the branches, and I'm going to dig around the roots, and I'm going to put some manure for fertilizer around it, and then after a year, if it doesn't bear fruit, then cut it down. And I think it's maybe a good analogy for our own lives if you're having trouble bearing the fruit that you'd like to, that sometimes we do need our branches pruned. Anyone can tell you, that really helps bear the fruit. But pruning is probably painful. Never been a tree, but I get that metaphor that cutting things back is sometimes painful. So some things need to be cut back in our life, maybe the main things we need to focus on. And then there's the idea of, digging up around the roots. Most of us have some things in the past, or maybe struggles in the present, that need to be dug up because we just bury over them. We just cover it up, don't we? Sometimes we need to do a little spiritual archaeology, dig that stuff up. Painful, but it helps. And then finally, my favorite, what do? Put manure on it. Actually, in the Bible, it's a little more blatant of what it is, but it's manure, okay? For fertilizer, because that's fertilizer, right? You can drive around Indiana, when they're fertilizing the field, right? And so if you have some manure in your life right now, maybe God is trying to fertilize you so your roots will grow so that you will bear fruit. Because that's the way the gardener does it sometimes. Needs to prune the branches for growth, needs to dig around the roots so that they can focus on the right things, and then needs to put some manure in our lives because that's fertilizer, because God sometimes uses the adversity, hardship, and difficulties of life to make us grow. But when we grow, we bear good fruit. And the third image is this great image that I love of the house that is built on the solid rock. And I love the hymn that we sang. I picked it. The Solid Rock by Edward Mote. And it's just so beautiful and profound. And Jesus says, if you live by these words, all of the Sermon on the Mount, You will be like the person who built his house on a solid rock, and when the winds and storms and waves came, the house stood firm. But if you don't live that way, you will be like the person who built their house on sandy soil, and it looked great, but then when the storms came, when the winds blew and the waves pounded it, it came crashing down with a great fall. And you look at that sometimes, and we're going to Florida, Savannah and I, before too long here, in June for vacation. And we love drives, but we love driving along the beach. We're both beach water people. And we love looking at those homes along the beach, don't you? Just go like, oh man, wish I could live there. Nice real estate. But then if you drive along the same area after a hurricane, which I have a number of times, you just see the devastation. And the reason for that is, sometimes that structure looks great, and from above the ground it looks great, and when it's sunny and it feels like a beach day, it looks great, but when the hurricane comes and the winds and waves come, it comes crashing down. And the reason for that, many times, isn't necessarily the structural integrity of the building itself, it's because of the foundation. And the reason is, it can withstand a lot of the winds, but when the waves come repeatedly, the waves carve out the foundation underneath the structure, and eventually it pulls the foundation out, and the structure comes tumbling down, be it a hotel or house or what have you. And so in our own lives, how are we doing with that? How are we building our lives on the rock-solid foundation, which is Jesus Christ? On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. Edward Mote, who wrote that, lived this life where his parents sort of mistreated him. He ran away, lived on the street for a while as a teenager, and this carpenter sort of took him under his wing, made him an apprentice, and he became a very skilled cabinet maker. And he took him while he was still a teenager to a revival service. And it was back in the 1800s. And he went to that revival service, and his life was forever changed by the message of Jesus Christ's love. And he became a carpenter in this area for some years. And then midway through his life, people asked him to work on this church, to build this church. And he was so dedicated. He just said, we'll just keep the money for right now. And then when it was all done, people said, what do you want in return for this? And he said, you know what? I don't want any money. Just let me preach. Let me be the pastor here. And so they said, okay. And the rest of his life, he was a pastor there until he died. And he wrote 300 hymns. One of them was The Solid Rock. Edward Mote, and on Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All that are ground is sinking sand. It's so true. And he looked at this, and the image that Paul uses in Corinthians, where Paul says, there's no foundation but Jesus Christ. What are you building your life on today? Will it withstand the storms, the winds and waves of life? Because Jesus didn't say, maybe the storms will come. Jesus basically said, the storms will come. The question is, will your house stand the storms and the tests of time? And if it's built on these words of mine, in my life, then your home will stand the test of time. In closing for this great Sermon on the Mount, I know we've been on this journey for some time, but I can't think of a better place to be than on the mountain with Jesus, to listen to his words that are such a challenge in some ways and so inspiring in others. And all of us will fall short, but if we're following Jesus, Jesus is there to lift us up and to forgive us and offer his grace. And the centerpiece, really the center kind of image, I think, that the whole thing revolves around, in addition to this mountaintop, is Jesus said, if you follow this, you will be like a light on a hill, like a light on the hill. Man, does our world need a light on a hill today. There's so much darkness out there. And then he closes with this image of the foundation of a home built on a solid rock. And I want to just close with a true story that I think brings those two images together. And it's a true story of Eddystone Lighthouse in Cornwall, England, which actually the lighthouse was built in a dangerous channel, an English channel, out away from shore, just in this rock, in this dangerous area where there's lots of storms. And the first person to build a lighthouse there to help the ships come in safely was a person by the name of Winstanley. He was a great architect. It was 1698, and he was famous not only for his architecture but also for his ego, for his pride, right? And so he built this incredible lighthouse there. It was just amazing. And then when it was all finished, he had inscribed on there these words: "Blow, O winds, rise, O oceans, break forth, ye elements, and try my work." And he was so arrogant that he would stand up in this tall lighthouse in the very top where the light shines out there onto the ocean, and he would just scream at the storms, right? And then, you guessed it, one storm came, and it was so powerful, it took the lighthouse down and him with it. And so it remained just rubble for some time. And then a person by the name of Rudyard came about a decade later, and he built a lighthouse that was built of wood. I don't know if the townspeople said, well, we're too cheap to use stone again. Or he just thought maybe, wood would be the newest, latest fashionable thing to use. And so he built a nice lighthouse of wood. And the unfortunate thing was that it caught fire from the light that was up there in the storms, and it burned to the ground. And then 50 years after that first lighthouse was put in there by Winstanley, a man by the name of Smeaton came along. He was not only a great architect, he was also a deeply devout religious person. And so he decided what he was going to do was doing something unique architecturally. Was he was going to attach the foundation of the lighthouse to the rock itself. And so he uniquely engineered so the foundation attached to the rock itself there in the middle of the English Channel. And he built a stone structure. And then he wrote this, he inscribed this in 1759 on the lower part of that lighthouse. It says this: "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." And in the very top where the light shines out into the darkness, he says, he's inscribed Laus Deo, which means light of God, light of God. And it stands to this day. It's been moved because of the historical significance, but it withstood all the storms of life. And I think in our own lives, as we aspire to these words of Jesus, as he calls us up the mountain and gives us this heavenly word, heavenly light, that it is difficult. But if we allow the Holy Spirit to help us lead our lives, and then when we stumble, we allow God's forgiveness and grace to fill our hearts and lives and renew our lives, that we are like a light in the night, Laus Deo, a lighthouse for everyone to see, not because of our light, but because of God's light shining through us. And we will stand the storms and test of time if, like that lighthouse and like Jesus' metaphor, our foundation is on the solid rock. And there's only one solid rock, which is Jesus Christ. Will you join me in prayer? Lord, as we think about these great words of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, spoken from the Mount of the Beatitude that calls us to such a lofty place, that inspires us and teaches us how to live our daily lives. We pray that you help us to do exactly that. But Lord, help us to remember that when we do fall short, that you're there to pick us up and to offer us forgiveness and grace and your love. And then you'll see us through the storms of life as we are anchored to the foundation, the only one true foundation, which is you, our Lord and Savior, and we become a beacon in the darkest night to the light that shines through us. We pray this in your name, and all God's people said, amen.